Next, we're going to review homeostasis. You're going to have to skip ahead in your packet somewhat. This starts on slide 56, goes up to slide 79. So talking about homeostasis, and when an organism can't maintain homeostasis, that's what we call disease. Disease is when, for some reason, the organism cannot maintain proper conditions. And disease could be caused by lots of factors. Could be just an internal factor that's not allowing for the maintenance of homeostasis. For example, diabetes would be an internal factor, that the cells in the pancreas are not producing insulin. Or it could be caused by a pathogen, and pathogens are other organisms that cause a disease, virus or bacteria, fungus, or other parasites. And so as a response to a pathogen entering an organism, that's what the immune system kicks in. And the immune system provides for protection from these pathogens. And our immune system recognizes a foreign invader, a pathogen, by recognizing special proteins that are on the outside cell membrane or cell wall of these pathogens. We call those antigens. And these antigens, for example, in this virus are these little spikes that are all around the outside. Those are the antigens. And our immune system can recognize those antigens. Okay? And the response of the immune system is to mark this invading cell, this pathogen. That's what antibodies do. And they bind to these antigens and then destroy the cells. And that's what these other cells are, these phagocytes are doing. They're engulfing and destroying this pathogen. We can see an actual electron microscope image of that over here. And so these antibodies are really important. Antibodies are what give us long-term protection against diseases, against pathogens that we've been exposed to. And we can see these antibodies are these sort of Y-shaped proteins. And the shape of the antibody matches with the shape of the antigen that's found on this bacteria. You can see these rounded shapes. These are the antigens that are on the surface of this bacteria. And the antibodies that are produced bind to those antigens. And they mark this bacteria cell to be destroyed by other parts of the immune system. And so antibodies are proteins, and like all proteins, it is their shape that is so important. The shape of the antibody matches with the shape of the antigen. And we can see that here in this slide, that these antibodies, they have a specific shape, like all proteins. And that shape is really important. And so once antibodies interact with an antigen, when they bind to it, they start the immune response, right? And they call in other cells. They clump together the pathogens. They signal for special cells to come and engulf and destroy those pathogens. So the immune response to a pathogen is pretty complex. And our immune system produces antibodies once we are exposed to antigens in a couple ways. So one way is by being immunized. A vaccine, an immunization, is exposing a person to either a weakened form of the pathogen, a dead form of the pathogen, just a part of the pathogen, and that will start an immune response in which the immune system recognizes the dead pathogen or the part of it, creates antibodies, which will then stay in circulation, allowing for long-term protection from this pathogen. That's how vaccines typically work. Now, again, we talked in class about RNA vaccines work a little bit differently. They're not actually injecting the weak or dead pathogen into a person. But for the Regents exam, you don't have to think too much about the RNA vaccines. We also become immune by actually being exposed to a disease and recovering from that infection. As I told you in class, I'm immune to chickenpox because when I was a kid, I got chickenpox. My immune system produced antibodies against it, and they're likely circulating in my blood now, protecting me from a second illness of chickenpox. Immunity can also be passed on from one person to another, especially in nursing mothers can pass on antibodies through milk into their babies. You could also have injections of antibodies that can give a person short-term immunity from a disease. Okay, again, we talked about vaccines just previously. Now, there are diseases of the immune system. One is called autoimmune disease. This is when our immune system, for some reason, attacks our own body cells, damaging them. Sometimes type 1 diabetes is caused by autoimmune response, when our immune system actually attacks cells in our pancreas and destroys them so that they no longer produce insulin. Also, some pathogens like the HIV virus attack our own immune system, and they cause a disease that's called AIDS. And because this HIV virus attacks immune cells, it leaves a person vulnerable to infections. Allergies are also an immune response. And allergies are when our immune system sort of kicks into action and starts an immune response to something that's actually not harmful, something like pollen or a bee sting or animal fur. And it causes our body to release a compound called histamine, which causes the typical swelling and runny nose and tearing eyes that we think of with an allergic reaction. Moving on in talking about homeostasis, we'll talk a little bit about and review some human systems. Humans are complex organisms with a variety of body systems that help us to maintain homeostasis. And these various body systems are all interacting with each other to allow us to maintain homeostasis. So one of those systems is the transport system or circulatory system, which transports materials throughout the body to distribute nutrients, to distribute oxygen to all parts of the body, while at the same time removing waste products from all parts of the body to be disposed of by the excretory system. The respiratory system's function is to provide for gas exchange, to take in oxygen from the air that we breathe in, and to release carbon dioxide waste that our cells have generated. And so as we inhale and inflate our lungs with air, that air eventually goes through the trachea, through bronchi, these big branches, and eventually they branch and end in these little clusters. They look like clusters of grapes. These little air sacs that are called alveoli. When these alveoli inflate as we inhale, surrounding the alveoli on the outside are capillaries. And so when these air sacs, these alveoli, inflate with air, oxygen from that air can diffuse into these capillaries and then be circulated throughout the body by the circulatory system. At the same time, carbon dioxide waste that's in this blood diffuses into the air in the alveoli, which we can then exhale to get rid of. We already talked about our immune system. Our immune system is a part of our circulatory system. It's part of our white blood cells and other parts circulate throughout our bloodstream. The cells are produced in the bone marrow of the skeletal system. Excretion is the removal of waste products from the blood. And so this happens in the skin and also the liver and the kidneys and the lungs. The main organ to understand we already talked about the lungs getting rid of carbon dioxide, which is a waste product. The kidneys are also really important. The kidneys, all of the blood in our body goes to our kidneys where special structures remove waste products from our blood and turn it into urine that we can then eliminate. And then the filtered blood goes back into circulation. Our liver helps metabolize drugs and other toxins so that they're less dangerous, and then we can remove them through urine. Activities in the body are coordinated by two different systems, the endocrine system of hormones and the nervous system. The nervous system works using electrical and chemical signals to pass information from one part of the body to another. The individual nerve cells, these neurons, communicate and send messages from one place to another. And they work by conducting an electrical signal down the axon of a neuron. And then at the end, once the message gets to the end of the neuron, special chemicals get released into this space that's called the synapse, and they bind to receptors on the next dendrite of the next neuron, causing the signal to continue to be passed on to the next cell. So they work on electrical signal, and then to bridge the gap, they work on a chemical signal. The endocrine system is, again, a system of coordinating activity in our bodies, but it works using hormones. Hormones are proteins produced in special glands in our body, that you see in this diagram. And these hormones circulate throughout the blood. And when these hormones bind to a receptor molecule on certain body tissues, they cause some action to take place. So again, these hormones are proteins. And as we said, the shape of the protein is what's so important, because the shape of the protein matches with the shape of a receptor molecule on the target tissue. And that allows these hormones to be specific. Hormones produced in the body circulate everywhere in the body, but they're only affecting certain target tissues because those target tissues have the proper receptor molecules. The reproduction system, we'll talk more about reproduction in another unit, in another review, but the reproductive system is adapted for the reproduction, the delivery of sperm cells into the female reproductive system, where they can fertilize egg cells that are released by the ovaries of the female reproductive system to produce a zygote, which will form an embryo and a fetus and a new offspring. Our system of movement works using muscles in our skeleton. Okay, our muscles can contract when they receive a message from the nervous system, and they pull on bones, which allow for us to move. And the muscular system is connected through these nerves to the nervous system. The digestive system allows us to take large molecules that we eat, and the digestive system allows them to be broken down or digested into smaller, simpler molecules, which can then be absorbed into the bloodstream to be distributed throughout the rest of the body. So the parts of the digestive system include the mouth and the esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, the colon, and some other parts which add enzymes and acids and bases to the food that we eat, allowing for it to be digested. Now, we've been talking about human systems, but even simple single-celled organisms also undertake these functions to help them to maintain homeostasis. The organelles found in a single-celled organism act like the organs in a multicellular organism. For example, in a multicellular organism like us, we exchange gas with the environment through our respiratory system. Well, a paramecium, a single-celled organism, doesn't have a respiratory system, but it does have a cell membrane so that materials can diffuse in and out of that organism. We have a digestive system. Okay. The paramecium, a single cell, doesn't have a system. It has instead an oral groove to take in food, which ends in a food vacuole where that can then be digested. So there's equivalence between the organelles and the organs and organ systems of a human. Okay, the paramecium is these cilia structures around the outside of the cell. They allow it to move, just like our muscles and bones allow us to move. So there's equivalence here. And we also should know about how these systems interact with each other. So human body systems are all interacting with each other. We breathe in oxygen with the respiratory system, but that oxygen then gets sent to the circulatory system to be distributed. Our endocrine system produces hormones, but they are transported around our body using our circulatory system. Our nervous system sends messages for us to move, but then passes them to the muscular system for the actual movement to take place. So these systems are interacting in all of these complex ways. You should be able to identify some ways that these different systems interact with each other. And that's it for homeostasis.